everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for the latest episode in the Festival of BIM and Digital Construction. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank all of our sponsors, but especially Microdesk, who are our sponsors for this session. We'll be kicking things off today with a panel discussion on how the supply chain influences and enables the end client's adoption of BIM. This will be moderated by Nicholas Wolf. Then we will be moving on with a presentation by Andy Dobree, who will be discussing BIM butterfly effect. Please do take the opportunity to ask any questions you may have for our speakers by submitting them into the question box on the right-hand side of the screen. Thanks again for joining us today. Over to you, Nicholas.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. My name is Nicholas Wolf. I'm the Director of Virtual Design and Construction here at Microdesk. I lead a team of folks that are construction-faced as well as pre-construction and fabrication specific for the MEP/FP trades. So today we want to help answer, maybe discuss the question: how can the supply chain influence and enable the end client's adoption of BIM? So we understand supply chain is critical to building these things. So let's introduce some of the folks that are going to help us with this discussion. Helen Taylor, Director of Practice at Scott Brownrigg. Helen.
Thanks, Nick. Hi, everybody. So as Nick said, I'm Director of Practice at Scott Brownrigg. I'm an architect, and Scott Brownrigg are architecture and interior designers working internationally. My role within the business is looking after competence and also compliance, and BIM and digital design fall under my remit, along with sustainability, technical design, and other key parts of what we deliver as architects and designers. So looking forward to the discussion today.
Thank you, Helen. And next we'll go to Anna Maddock. Anna, please.
Hi, everyone. I am the Director of Digital Development at Scott Brownrigg. As Helen introduced us, we're architects. We work in quite a lot of different sectors in architecture, and my remit is really looking after the BIM team, but also I work closely with the teams on setting up the projects and setting up models and maintaining them. And I also work closely with the consultant and contractor team, and also with the clients to set up briefs. So my view of BIM is from a sort of leading the team point of view.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. Okay, next, Lewis Watts. Please introduce yourself.
Hi, thanks, Nick. Yeah, Lewis Watts here with Autodesk. I'm a global major projects development executive. I kind of specialize in large infrastructure, working with a lot of our key customers, but also do a fair amount of client education and work a lot with airport owners. From my background as well, previously operated as a BIM lead for an airport.
Awesome. Thank you. And interestingly enough, next, Brendan Dillon, please introduce yourself.
On mute, Brendan.
2 unmute buttons. Great. Thank you, Nick. As mentioned, yes, I am the Digital Facilities and Infrastructure Program Manager for Denver International Airport. I've actually worked with Lewis a good bit in the past, and probably going into the future. As the client, we've got a lot of facilities. We've got 20 million square feet of facilities. We've got 53 square miles of campus, and a lot of data associated with that. And the challenge that we've noticed isn't so much adoption, it's language, and establishing the same expectations across the supply chain. But as mentioned in our side discussions, where really we work a lot with other owners, because the more owners we get on board with speaking the same language of BIM and the same understanding of BIM, the better it is for us, because then our supply chain, whether it's software developers, designers, contractors, are all speaking the same language and all looking for the same thing. So looking forward to this discussion.
Awesome. Thank you, Brendan. Yeah. And Andy, please introduce yourself.
Yeah, hello, good afternoon from the UK. If you're in the UK today, Andy Bootle, Head of BIM for Construction in Kier Group. Kier Group, if you're not aware, are a leading construction and infrastructure provider, so predominantly main contractor in the UK. So I look after BIM and work on digital strategy in the group there. I'm also representing the UK BIM Alliance, which is an industry-led organisation initiative to try and help the implementation of BIM in the UK. And I lead the co-lead engagement for that effort. So really good to be here.
Awesome, great to have everybody. Andy, thank you. Yeah, so this topic, it was born from a few different things. So the MBS report of 2020 is one of those key items. McKinsey report and the Egan report, right? So it's topical. It's out there. We all as professionals and practitioners in the space, we know we need more participation from our supply chain subcontract partners. So essentially, how can we do it? How can the supply chain help us? You know, and enable that client. I mean, we're only here because the client is building a product or a project. So, you know, Helen, would you like to kick it off with some sentiment on how we can get to that supply chain group?
Thanks, Nick. Yeah, so from my strategic perspective, I very much see BIM as, you know, one of a lot of things that we as architects have to deal with when we're approaching any design. And I think the key thing for me is our understanding and our competence in the subject matter and our ability to be able to communicate that to the clients. If we're passionate about it, if we understand the benefits of it, then that's going to have a huge impact. It's the same as dealing with all other issues around that we're looking at the moment around climate change, around health and safety. You know, we have to really care about it, and we really have to know our stuff in order to help the client. But I do think that there's also an issue about being able to our ability to talk to clients about it and understand ourselves what the benefits to clients are. And I don't think perhaps we are asking clients directly those questions enough and understanding and learning the lessons from projects that have gone before. And practices like ours, which work in pretty much every single sector, there's such a huge range of adoption. So in the aviation sector, I'm sure Brendan will tell us about the huge amount of adoption there in data centers. There's a really positive impact there in terms of BIM and the use of BIM, but we see in some other sectors like education, schools particularly, they're really at very early stages and they haven't really had an opportunity to understand how it can help them, because the procurement route and the management of their facilities doesn't always allow that to happen.
Absolutely, and that is interesting in the sense that you know, some of the larger owners that have, you know, landscapes, to Brendan's point originally, right? Just the amount of things that they need to keep track of versus, say, a grammar school or a grade school to that effect. Brendan, anything from your perspective that you know, that can help sort of fill in the blanks on why, you know, and what it is that you need as an owner?
As an owner in general, it's hard because, as you said, there are so many facility types. You know, what someone who is a data center owner needs is very different from what someone who is a grammar school owner. But also, there's the difference in scale there. But even if you compare a data center to, say, a hospital, which also has very intensive needs, they still have very different expectations, and they're looking to go across their organization and not necessarily, particularly in the US, not necessarily looking to adhere to a given standard. I'm a bit envious of what you deal with in Europe, where there is a much stronger emphasis on international standards. The US has struggled to even settle on a national standard. There's certainly no mandate or standard even at the state level in most states, which is part of why we at Denver International Airport try to be as engaging with software developers, with designers, with the contractors, and with particularly other owners, because the more we can all get on the same page and speaking the same language, the better that's going to go for all of us. Yeah, definitely a little bit envious of what you're dealing with over in Europe.
Right, no doubt. Brendan, go through that a little bit more though about interacting with your subcontract partners, right? So what is that interaction more tailored towards? Is it what they're to supply or how they're going to supply it in the details?
Well, the first step in that discussion really, so you might notice the bizarre title I've got, digital facilities and infrastructure. That's because we try not to call it BIM, because when we say BIM in the US, people think they're delivering something that is very different from what it is we're actually looking for. Now, if you look at the classical definition of BIM, what we're looking for is right there. But in practice, it has become much more design centric and much less about the flow of information throughout the life cycle of the facility. Very few owners are doing really intensive asset management programs. They're not flowing the data through their organization. So first they have to break down the walls within their organization so that they're actually able to use the information. And then they need to work with the design. We need to work with our partners so that they understand that when we say we want BIM, we don't just mean do it in software X or on software platform Y or host it up in the cloud or do clash coordination. We actually mean here are our asset types. Here's the data we need about each asset type. We need it delivered at this point in the project process. We need it updated and checked here. And we're going to have our QA staff checking it here. And you're going to need to make sure you reconcile it at the end of the day. And then it's all in a format that our maintenance systems, our GIS systems, our operation systems, our emergency management systems can all intake and process and put to use. Because at the end of the day, if we just have a model, I mean, it's great as a model, but if it's not, if the data isn't all formatted, if it's not all verified, and if it's not all something that we can feed into those systems, it's not useful.
Right. So the software bit for sure, specifying that is just a means to get where we need to be. But Andy, from your perspective, someone who has the ability or the luxury, as Brendan has identified it, to have a well-defined specification, talk to us a little bit about managing it post-design.
Yeah. So I mean, I wouldn't be too jealous because we end up in the UK just arguing about the standards, but it is absolutely, it isn't, you know, we are lucky to have that, certainly a government mandate and an adoption of a standard to as a framework to base the process around. Again, I think just picking up on what a few things that were said, completely agree, Brendan, with what you said, and I think the understanding is changing quite rightly, that, you know, when people start to mention BIM, rightly or wrongly, it's useful, it isn't useful, but the understanding is moving away from BIM equals models to it is about the wider information management process, which is fundamentally what we're trying to get to here. So in terms of standards, so I'll just do a bit, and it is related to the topic of the panel actually, in terms of, you know, how can the supply chain enable, support, advise. And there's definitely, as Helen summed up there, I think absolutely, you know, the passion and the understanding and experience from the supply chain should percolate up to help clients where needed. The good news is, in terms of ISO 19650, which is the international standard that describes information management using BIM, is there's certainly an emphasis on that end, or as it calls, an appointing party, the end client. You know, there's an absolute emphasis of the client does need to understand the context of information management across the project and assign out the various clauses in the ISO appropriately. So what that does, I think, is and it's not saying as the client you must do all of it. Absolutely not. There's the option to either assign out responsibilities to a third party, information management consultant essentially, or indeed a lead appointed party, a tier one, whether that be an architect, a contractor, client's project manager, whoever that is, to fulfill some of those clauses. Which is where absolutely the supply chain can help, and help under contractual terms to fulfill and support that information management function on behalf of the client. Obviously there's situations where it won't be contractual, and we should be, guiding, helping, supporting. But you don't want to get to a blurred line where there's expectations that aren't actually appointed. So it's a careful balance, I think. But it does certainly focus clients to understand that, information management, and if they don't, then get the appropriate help required.
Yeah, no doubt. So Andy, from your experience, is that more likely the scenario in terms of self-performing from a BIM perspective when it comes to subcontract and supply chain, or are they doing it?
I think it's a real mixed bag. Again, and not just demand and supply chain. There's the capabilities are very much like this, and something that we're trying to, obviously, as industries in our regions or globally even, is just to try and up the baseline across the picture. I mean, I've worked on, before my current role, when I was more at project delivery end, I actually worked on a really good project for a client where they got the need. They were still forming their information requirements at the start of the project when we were appointed quite early on, and we almost reverse engineered their information requirements from us as a supplier, what we thought could be useful for them, what we thought we could deliver, and that led to a conversation and ended up them forming their information requirements that way, which I wouldn't say by any means is best practice, but it actually did achieve a pretty good outcome in the end. And again, that was a few years ago, so perhaps a bit back in time, but yeah, there's many ways you can end up at hopefully a half decent outcome for all involved.
Absolutely, yeah. Lewis, any global perspective when it comes to supply chain adoption that can help us sort of understand the influence and the enablement of the end result?
Yeah, I mean, my perspective really is a lot of what Andy's discussed there is there's some rigor that we're trying to apply to the philosophy around BIM, but ostensibly what most of the supply chain are looking for is some direction from their client, some definition over what it is they want. Now, what you find is the more definition a client is willing to put in at the front, generally you'll see better outcomes driven out of the supply chain. Again, there's a balance there because that's not always going to be the case. And the client still needs to understand what it is they've asked for and also what it is they're in receipt of. And sometimes when you've got a low mature client, there's where Andy's suggesting, actually the ISO doesn't preclude that they have to be an expert, but they should be aware of resources available to them to ensure this data is being created compliant with their requirements. Now, at the end of the day, when we talk about BIM, we often really refer into lifecycle data management. And if you look at the ISO, okay, part 2 is really focused on capital delivery. But as we all know, capital delivery is the smallest portion of a building or a facility's life cycle. And so if we just harness all the benefits of BIM as we do design and construct, which is where we've put most of our front-loaded efforts, which is logical, but we don't capitalize on all of that good quality content throughout the rest of that 60-year lifespan of that building, then we haven't done BIM, or we certainly haven't seen through the philosophy of BIM. And it's for the person that needs to operate those 60 years to tell the people delivering it what it is they require to know in order to lead to a successful operation. And that's the way I would summarize this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's great. That's well said, Lewis. Anna, any insight? So from the specification, the early on communication, right, to get all that sort of solidified into a document. Any sentiment on that?
Yeah, it's interesting, and really agree with everything that's been brought up so far. I was trying to think of how I would summarize what happened. Basically, a lot of people think of BIM as something that happens just before the construction of a building, and not before and not after. But actually, BIM is very much already here right from the start all the way through to the end of the project, and as Lewis just mentioned, really should start becoming much more focused on the handover and the management of the building and in use sort of life of a building, which is much longer and much more significant in cost. From an architect's point of view, we find that our clients are very open to working with us to clarify the brief. So if they don't come to us with a brief or employers' requirements, if we start talking to them early, they're very open to understanding how to do it in a most pragmatic and practical way. And I think, again, that's when things really work well, because there is no such brief that will fit everyone. Every project is slightly different, and every project will have slightly different information management requirements. But it just means that if we work with a client from the start, what we do as designers for our purpose to coordinate things can also start becoming something that's useful to the client, either to sign things off or to draw schedules from, or simply to get to know the project much better during its development and then as it's being handed over. I think supply chain can help a lot. Supply chain just needs to be given a moment in time, and that moment isn't just once. It's like at every stage there has to be a moment when you actually sit down and talk about it and try and rewrite the brief, or at least update the brief. But I think, on successful projects, that usually happens quite a lot during the design stages, and by the time we get into construction, both the brief for the contractor is clear, but also the roles and responsibilities on the project are quite clear as well.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting, because that early communication, early set out of those requirements always takes place with the owner, right? Again, we're only building, or we're only designing because of that owner's interaction. But I think to your point,
absolutely.
Yeah, I think to your point, that supply chain communication needs to start almost as early, and it's unfortunate, at least in the States, that it's rare, because in either an IPD opportunity or a design build opportunity is really the only time we get to do that, and that's really unfortunate.
Yeah.
Yeah, honestly. So Brendan, any insight, right? Getting in there early to talk about folks performing of the BIM level of work earlier than, hey, here's your subcontract award. We'll see you at the owners meeting in 3 weeks. Is there any occasions, where that communication starts early for you?
So for us, it's a conversation that never really stops. We're always trying to get into the conversation as early as possible when we start talking about a project, and it's almost cyclical when you start looking at it, because you say, okay, do I want to be there at project kickoff? No, I want to be there before project kickoff. I want to be there when we start talking about scoping the project a little bit. Well, do I really want to be there at scoping the project, or do I want to be there really at initial project definition, when we're realizing that there is someone asking for something? Well, do I really want to be there at project definition, or do I want to be there sooner? Do I want to be there during the discussions about maintenance as the problems are going on with the maintenance? And then, so you're in maintenance. Do I want to be there during the discussions for maintenance? No, I want to be there before maintenance starts becoming an issue. I want to be there during startup of a facility. So it's a cyclical thing. Like there is no such thing as getting involved too early for the owner. Getting the supply chain involved, it's complicated, because owners don't want to be sold stuff, especially if they don't know how to use it, right? I think the best thing that the supply chain can do is, and this is a truism generally, is develop relationships with the owners, so that you have a really solid understanding of what it is that the owner is capable of. Because while an owner may feel like they need BIM, and may genuinely believe that, and maybe really into I really need this data, if they don't actually have the capability to put that data to use as soon as they get it, and that data then sits on the shelf for 6 months, 2 years, 5 years, it's dead. It's useless. So if I were to give any advice to the supply chain, it's develop those relationships and don't try to sell, which I know is hard. You know, provide information and wait for the owner to say, hey, you know, I think we're ready for this thing. You know, if there's something you're going to try to sell, try to keep it on the small scale. You know, try to emphasize, hey, you know, we know you guys aren't looking for BIM, and maybe you're not ready for BIM, but hey, we're doing this really advanced spatial coordination and clash detection stuff that, you know, it's not necessarily going to be a cost add. This is something that is going to save money over the course of the project. It's going to improve our processes. We might want to make sure that you as the owner are aware of what it is that we're doing, because as the owner, you're paying for this data and you're going to receive this data at the end of the day. So if you can start preparing to receive it, then you'll be able to get greater value out of it.
Yeah, that's perfect. So about that, about the data, about being prepared, any roadblocks that you foresee starting that conversation? Fortunately, I think it's in the best interest of the supply chain to start having that communication very early, right? Get themselves known, talk about their capabilities, right? Minimize the selling aspect of it. Any roadblocks, any barriers? I mean, you know, either Andy, from your experience, you know, of getting early on in that conversation, is there anything that, you know, that you need to initially break down in order to facilitate it, right?
Yeah, and I was itching to say that when Brendan was talking there, is that absolutely right. And you know, we must remember what we're not trying to do. What we're trying to do is deliver the minimum amount of information required that's useful. You know, we can lavishly, you know, provide reams of data which we think could be good for end client or even our supply chain partners, but if it's not going to be used, then we're just generating information waste and making ourselves less productive. So I completely support that. Just what you said, definitely that, you know, early engagement is definitely key, and it's often a frustrating barrier. But, you know, with my contractor hat on, thinking back to previous schemes I've been involved in, just trying to get an early conversation with, say, the facilities manager, asset manager of a client we're starting to engage with is really difficult. And sometimes you know, I can't get hold of the right person, and then lo and behold, you know, stage 3 or whenever you are deep into the project, you finally have that conversation and find out that, oh, actually, though, that the structure and the content actually is going to be completely different to what the brief was. So definitely early engagement to help all involved definitely is a massive advantage if that can be done.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to sort of quickly dissect the question in itself, and let's maybe discover which end of the sentence is really it. So is it the supply chain not doing enough influencing and enabling, or is it that the owner is not requesting and requiring or being knowledgeable of, right? Because I think folks like Brendan, right, and other owners maybe around the world are starting to understand that the more that they can capture that construction life cycle from design through turnover, the more that they can capture that data, the better off they will be on day one. Is it the supply chain not offering, you know, those skills and that knowledge base, or is it the client not asking? Helen, maybe from a programmatic sort of standpoint, what do you think?
It's really interesting breaking down that question, actually, Nick, because I was just sitting here reflecting on the phrase the supply chain and thinking, are we actually acting like a chain? You know, are we linked, or are we just lots of separate, you know, loops that aren't really quite joined up? And should we be a chain, but should we be an ecosystem? And I mean, I've got a particular bee in my bonnet about the fact that you know, we in the supply chain call ourselves the construction industry, and actually we should be the built environment industry, because we need to be thinking much more holistically. And if we were thinking more holistically, not just in terms of individual projects, which are kind of moments of change in the built environment, but actually, and thinking how we can have that more holistic approach that Brendan was talking about. So we were being proactive and kind of thinking about where we can have influence and where we can add value. I just think we need a different mindset to kind of pull all these things together. And then BIM, I think, would just happen a little bit more naturally, because we would see the digital environment as a way of facilitating the kind of big picture positive change that we want to see in the environment as a whole. And I think we were talking about language as well, and I think, you know, the word BIM unfortunately does put people off sometimes, because they either think, well, I don't know what it is, so I don't think I need it, or, you know, if from the designer's perspective, they just see it as a techie thing still, that's not necessarily about, you know, high quality design. So I think we do need to break it down, and I think if we start from a different standpoint and think about, well, you know, what are we trying to achieve overall? You know, this is about people, it's about you know, really positive places for people, then actually and then using BIM to enable that to happen, then I think actually a lot of this would happen a bit more naturally, and we wouldn't need to persuade clients, because they'd want it, they'd see the benefit of it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the benefits would be blatantly clear. So we do have some questions. I do want to get into these. I think they're easily melded together, though, in the sense that specifically, what difficulties have any of you come up with in the supply chain, right? Anything related to it, and how did you overcome it, number one? And number two, should the supply chain be responsible for education of what we're trying to do? Or do you think the owner should go off and sort of figure out their own stuff? I've got very specific things when it comes to that, because we've seen specifications all over the world, right, that drive to this point of an idea that the owner is captured and then wants through maybe accurate or inaccurate education. So who's responsible for doing that education bit first? And second, what was the challenge with that, and how did you overcome it? Who would like to take a quick stab at that? Quick stab at a very long question. Anna, what do you think?
Remember to unmute. Well, I'd like to answer your first question about who is responsible to educate who in this matter. I think the interesting thing is that regulation and standards are changing quite a lot. The report we're responding to, which is MBS report, does state that 10 years ago, almost no one knew any standards, whereas now we are actually, you know, here we are, we have an internationally accepted standard. Of course, maybe it's not used equally everywhere, and it might take another 3-4 years for it to really embed, but we are getting there. Means that, you know, we can open anyone's model and anyone's drawing, and they will start making sense, and that's like a language. So we're starting to become like a world that understands each other, and I think that's great. And in that sense, we don't have to do that much educating anymore. And you know, if the client is interested and has prepared some brief, then there is enough to work from. On the other hand, I think the multitude of stuff to keep up with is great out there, and for us, the main sort of issues are projects that are quite long. They tend to spread over many years. So, you know, in BIM terms, that's like centuries basically, because 5 years later, everything has changed. And you know, including the technology, including the way things are called, including, you know, how you refer to the client. So I think if your ear is on the ground the whole time, that's great. But you know, we have entire design teams who are really busy doing a lot of other stuff, so they don't necessarily have to keep up with all the language and everything. So I think those are the challenges that we encountered most. It's just making sure that there is a continuity across all projects and all all sort of all length of projects as well.
Sure. And so from that, is it the influx of acronyms, new things, right? New acronyms that come out, or you think it's more of I've started this in 2020, I'm to complete in 25, and we know there's going to be something different? Is it software, or you know?
Do you want funny examples or terrible examples? I don't know.
Well,
I mean,
comedy is always good. So, yeah.
Okay, so so now the client is not a client anymore. The client is an appointing party, and we're either a lead appointed party, and Andy as well, or we're an appointed party, depending where we are in the pyramid of. That means now when we're checking all the contracts and everything, that first some contracts will be in the old terminology, some contracts will be in the new terminology. I think what it creates a little bit of a little bit of resistance in the wider design team to actually keep up with everything and to be specific. So I think the language would need to be static for a while for it to become very specific, because then everyone will understand what you mean. Like this, I say, oh, it's exchange information requirements. They say, oh, what's that? I never even heard. Well, that's employers information requirements. Oh, right, okay, that's EIR. And years later there will be something else. So I think that things need to stay for a bit, in a place for everyone to catch up, and then we can move on maybe. So for me, that seems to be the biggest problem.
Yeah, staying static in an ever-changing world, right? We'll
yes.
conquer that as we
How
go.
to, yes.
Can I just add to what Anna said there again? Because I get asked this quite a lot from sort of, SMEs in the supply chain as well, and I think every organisation as part of this industry modernisation has their own responsibility to keep as well as they can up to date with the landscape, don't they? And whether that's it's just someone in that organisation or a group of people who are whether you call them specialists, whatever that is, are focused on the changing landscape, the detail, the acronyms that no one else really needs to know of in the company, but then they're translating whatever that is as a process into language that the organization you work with can understand and follow. And it's almost a role of the specialists around the place to try and deal with all of the detail and the terminology. Yes, you do need an understanding of language, and we do confuse things quite a lot, and the goalposts are always shifting. It's really difficult. But yeah, certainly just having someone accountable and looking at that, focusing on that area of progression, I suppose, is helpful, and then helping to upskill their fellow team members and colleagues.
For sure.
I guess just to add to that, Andy, that while some of the terminology has evolved as it's become an international standard, that was to suit a wider audience. Yeah. I appreciate here in the UK, where we were very familiar with the PAS terminology. I understand that, and it's obviously a challenge we're overcoming. But the general premise and the educational piece is not necessarily down in terminology and technical understanding. Where we're educating clients is really about the value of the information they can be in receipt of, and about how they could be using it to their advantage. I'd probably avoid getting into EIRs and BEPS before I really had to, and before I'm talking with the right candidates within the client organization. Because if we get into that sort of granularity of the BIM process, you've probably already lost them. They really want to understand at a principle level, what is BIM and how does it benefit me? And I guess we're probably best placed even at that point to be talking in layman's terms and not in technical terminology.
Yeah, well said, Lewis. Well said.
Yeah, fantastic point. Since we're in the realm of acronyms and such, there's a great question at the top. So this may be lore or other, but let's discuss it anyway, because I think it might be interesting, right? So somebody is stating that the UK is looking to drop the building, quote unquote, the building from building information modeling and focus on information management. Any thought on that? or is that complete?
Yeah.
Let's think of the information management of it, though, right?
If I could touch on that.
Or who is that, Brendan?
Yeah. So I lack a little context here. I guess it depends on whether the approach is drop building in the sense of we have to talk about the entire campus, because again, as an airport, we've got 53 square miles of campus. We've got a lot of civil infrastructure. We've got a lot of roadways. We've got a lot of bridges. runways out the wazoo. So on that side, adding the emphasis of the broader construction, and construction is a terrible word too, if you were to throw it in there, because then people think only about the construction process.
So B for built environment would work, wouldn't it? But unfortunately, it's not.
Right.
Yeah.
What's interesting about this, and the reason why I want to bring it up, I'm sorry, is that this goes back to Helen's sentiment about ecosystem, right? Like supply chain, right? As a linear, all linked thing. I think we need to really open that up in terms of an ecosystem, right? And I think that's maybe regardless of looking to drop the building aspect of it, but I think what it's looking to do is maybe to broaden that sentiment, because we know as practitioners that the information, the I in the in the BIM is really, that's it, right? The data.
Could I just very quickly, because I think it was related, specifically that question was relating to the UK, wasn't it? And I just want to get in there. So no one's trying to redefine what B stands for or what BIM stands for. It's building information modeling, and like it or loathe it, that's what it was defined as. But what we're trying to do is shift BIM's always been about design, construct and operate. It's never been about just one area. It's about life cycle, like you said. But yeah, we're trying to change the understanding the language to focus around information management using BIM, which is actually what the ISO, the terminology used. But yeah, just to clear.
Yes, Andy, you kind of mentioned there that it's actually the M we're taking more of an issue with here.
Which is
and
modeling.
Instead of modeling, you know, we really for a very long time been seeing the M as a management M.
Yeah.
And now BIM has evolved from being born out of buildings to now into civil infrastructure.
Yeah.
Now that acronym is maybe not particularly accurate. We started this conversation talking about how most of us try and avoid using that as an acronym as we operate through our day-to-day lives. We know as, you know, purists what it means and how it should be inherited, but the word has become a dirty word, I think, in the industry.
Right. Andy, thank you for dispelling that rumor. That's
no worries.
Fantastic. Yeah. No, so I and again, like I said, that was probably centered in more, but I just think it's interesting, right, that we're trying to pick this apart while we're also trying to standardize and move forward in perpetuity. Okay, so we're talking about, there's some other questions about COBie data. One of the functions here in the States for turning over the I piece of the BIM process. Let's talk about how it was handled, though. I mean, in terms of turning over that data, right? So from a specification standpoint, we know what we want to turn over. Turning that over and speaking towards the client's adoption, right, of adopting that information and actually using it. Any thoughts on that from the group? Might be a good Dylan question potentially.
You know, COBie is probably an even dirtier word than BIM, at least at Denver Airport. And the challenge with COBie is, at least in the US, in our experience, is that as soon as you start talking about COBie, you start talking about big amounts of money coming from the designer and the contractor, because COBie is looking for a ton of data. And, you know, even as an agency that has been working with dirty word BIM for a number of years, we still wouldn't be able to make use of most of that data. There is so much stuff in there that, and while COBie is something that certainly can be pared down, and you say, okay, I need this information from COBie, it's a bit like dropping the BIM word, because as soon as you say COBie, people think they're going to need to provide you with gigs upon gigs of data, when really, as a facility owner, what we need, what gives us the most value, is somewhere in the area of 150-ish asset types with 20-ish general pieces of information that apply to and identify all of them, and a few other additional pieces of information that we don't even ask the contractors to give us. We capture that ourselves. So what we look for as far as data is this very, very, very small slice as compared to the gigantic, I wouldn't even call Kobe a pie in that case. I'd call it more like a pie shop, and we just want a single slice.
Is that not just a question back to you, Brendan? I don't confess to be a Kobe expert by any means, or I'm kind of on the fence with it. I can see, but certainly there's a lot of that. It's a structure of how the data is presented, isn't it? As opposed to thou will give me this, and you do go, you decide what assets you want information against, and define what what parts of the schema is useful to you. Albeit I appreciate that there's a lot of standard fields, aren't there, that have to be provided, which is perhaps what you're referring to, the reams and reams of data. It's got a mixed reception in the UK, I think, and we've tried to make it in the true Kobe standard is relating only to buildings, isn't it? And maintainable assets are in the UK. We've tried to make it adaptable for infrastructure as well, to mix success. And there's certainly some work going on at the moment in the UK with looking at next steps of actually what are the other, how does it need to develop? Are there other model view definitions that will be useful, not just the facilities management handover piece? But yeah, it's a mixed reception to Kobe, I think, isn't it, across the board?
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think it's interesting because that's the framework that was set out by some government entities here in the States, which is interesting. So looking at moving forward, right? So we just identified a potential change in the acronym or a direction of how we're going to treat what all of that means. So in order to best keep the supply chain influencing and enabling and the clients adopting and consuming and wanting more, how do we keep up? There's we always look for the BIM button, right, to make it just happen. And then there's also the method of going out and talking to Google or whatever search engine you wish to find these sort of answers. What is this group's suggestion? Where is it that we're going to go to keep up with these standards? Is there going to be an info text to our cell to say, hey, by the way, there's a new acronym out there? What are we thinking on that? Lewis, globally, from a global standpoint, ever changing on that landscape, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, this is something I'm pretty passionate about, the client education side, certainly. I sit with Andy as well on the BSI committee for ISO 19650. Last year, with a couple of attendees at the UK BIM Alliance, we also started to reignite BIM for clients in the UK, which was a BIM 4. But it was basically an open forum to allow clients that were interested in progressing or understanding BIM to attend on an educational basis. And I think we're seeing a number of those groups kind of cropping up. We do, through Autodesk, we have a Rails Summit now as well. I've been running for the last 4 years an international airport forum for airport owners to come and share their war stories, their trials, their tribulations, and really get all of these guys up to par. I tend to run the EMEA side of that, and we've now started kicking that into a global virtual group, which partners with Brendan's Americas group. So maybe, Brendan, you could talk on some of the education you do for our owners in the States.
Sure. It started off as a pretty informal thing where we just realized that we as airport owners and operators were dealing with a lot of the same problems, asset management, GIS, BIM, and integrating all of that information. And we said, well, why do we keep reinventing the wheel? And we just started meeting on an annual basis and exchanging, what was working, what was not working. Apologies to the supply chain. We've actually been pretty proactive at excluding the supply chain because there is that concern about being sold too much. One of the few occasions when we do get together pretty regularly is at conferences. And at conferences, typically technical conferences, we're getting sold to constantly. whether it's someone selling drafting software or someone selling asset management software or whatever it may be, there was always that, okay, but does it really work? You know, where are the owners? Where are the folks that have deployed this? What is their real experience? And that was the goal of that, is to have those conversations in an environment where, for lack of a better word, it was a safe space. We didn't have to. We weren't going to be sold to, and where we could essentially confess to our sins and failures as owners, and help each other to get across those bridges. And it's been pretty successful. We've had, Denver's been fortunate to have been an early adopter, and we've gotten a lot done, but we still have learned a lot from talking to other airport owners, whether they're huge ones, for large international airports such as Heathrow or some of the New York airports, or whether it was small ones, small regional airports who are just like, hey, we have super limited resources, but we're still interested in this. And then they'll ask a question that makes you think, oh, geez, why didn't I think of that? I could have just saved myself 9 months. So it's been a really fantastic opportunity. It's just something that has to be managed really carefully.
Absolutely. Managed guidance management and sort of conformance of all that for sure. Awesome. I think I want to go towards what's next, right? So what are the big sort of catalyst things, or the big sort of events or items? It could be anything, right, that we think is going to really change supply chain in the relationship with owners moving forward. I'm going to go in a weird order, but yes, Anna, for sure.
I was going to drop another possibly tricky word, or two words. I think what's going to happen is that we're all going to get much faster at delivering things, really, in terms of the technology is just moving, and we are just becoming, things are becoming more normal, basically. So, stuff that wasn't possible on one of these, this is my phone, I don't know if you can see it in the background, but, we're going to be using BIM as a more kind of everyday thing, more and more. And in fact, it's kind of coming into our houses already. People are monitoring their houses and their electricity usage and all of that stuff. So I think what's going to happen is that we are going to get better at delivering BIM so that it's useful to the client, whatever shape or form, whether that's a model or a set of data or whatever. And that in the same time, the world will get more connected, and the digital twin of the future will become a much more kind of everyday thing. So for us as professionals, I think it's to understand where we sit in that process and to hopefully lead the way in a positive, proactive way. I saw that one of the questions is very good, saying that we shouldn't get so fixated on the highway code of BIM, but actually on just producing and delivering pragmatic, solutions. And I think that's completely correct. The sort of regulation of BIM became very, very very complex and very ambitious for a while, and now it's time to kind of narrow down, get faster, get better, and in the same time the technology is giving us all these really quite user-friendly apps and things that we can use. So I think both will come together in the next few years, and we should just keep an eye on that.
Speed of technology and widespread adoption. I love it. Dylan, or Brendan.
So as soon as Anna said she was going to bring in two words, I knew exactly what you were going to say, and it's exactly what I was going to lead into as well. And I had this realization actually over this past weekend, because digital twin is something that's much on our mind. I think in some terms it addresses the sometimes problematic terminology of BIM, because a digital twin, when you think about it, just makes sense. Okay, you've got a digital twin of your campus. That's all right, I get that. And I had the realization this weekend as I was puttering around my house of, geez, how I would love to have a digital twin of my house. So my challenge to the supply chain and I'm not going to look too hard at you, Lewis, is make it so that the average person can create a digital twin of their home. And then we will be at a point where owners and users will be able to really get the value of BIM and the digital twin and all of that data. When that becomes something that we can deal with on a day-to-day basis, whether you're a facility owner for, whether you're the owner of the Denver International Airport or the United States GSA or Heathrow Airport or any of those places, or a guy who lives in an apartment and wants to see the performance of his or her apartment. When it's that accessible and that consumable, that would revolutionize the industry. So there's my challenge.
Yeah, that's perfect. Perfect. Andy, any sentiments?
I think that was really well summed up and completely agree. I think so. It's just in terms of I think where the direction ahead now with the UK is in this space is there's a focus back on interoperability. When I'm talking about that, I mean really trying to get open standards fully understood, embraced, and adopted. That's seen as one of the blockers that we've had in the UK to why the business case isn't becoming really evident, and some of the struggles we have is trying to get information from technology A to technology B and it to be used, reused appropriately and to work. So there's a focus on that, and then the fundamental future state is this utopia digital twin where fundamentally our social and economic infrastructure is performing for the citizens it interact with it. But that's again an uncomfortable space for me, and it's a future ambition, but that's what we're trying to build the foundations for here and now, I think.
Absolutely. At least making it possible. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Enabling and yeah.
Indeed. Ellen?
Thanks, Nick. Oh, there's so many things I'm thinking about. It's hard to kind of pin down to one thing. I think the main thing that comes into my head is about future generations, the next intake into the industry and how that's going to change things. So number one, I think we see with our young people, our graduates coming into the business, that they are total digital magpies. They will they beg, borrow and steal from everywhere. They're very flexible about how they see software working. They know how to manipulate things in a way that I can't even imagine. So I think the way that they use software and interact with software is going to be so different in the future. That's going to have a huge impact. But along with that, we do really still need to keep attracting a diverse range of people into the industry. We do have a real challenge in the construction industry in terms of diversity and inclusion and just getting people in, because they still see it as quite an old-fashioned kind of profession to be in. So I think the fact that we are able to produce this incredible amount of digital information, we as a team have a huge impact on the way that our built environment works. I think we need to make sure those messages are getting out to young people so that we can get the best young people and a really diverse intake into the industry to keep pushing these agendas forward.
Absolutely. No, that's awesome. The new generation interacting with this stuff, accessible, modifying it to their liking. Absolutely. So at 10:58, with a couple minutes to go, Lewis, just beyond Forge in the interoperability of software and technology, any closing thoughts on that? Got your mute on, Lewis.
Thank you. Yeah, no, I don't want to be too product specific, but I guess the general philosophy is that we've tried to remove as many barriers as we can for people to access the data as they require it. And we're seeing that now in the cloud a lot, but also in the simplicity of the tools, the large model viewer and things like that. That was always a challenge for me working in an owner's environment where you don't have too many experts. but something like the large model viewer on an iPad, you know, it can be driven by children. It's really that simple. And for me, that's the barrier that needs to come down, in not having to be a BIM modeling guru just to interact with this process. And once we can prove that, I think a lot more people will be willing to come to the table.
Absolutely. Yeah. Making it approachable and accessible. Well, with a minute left, I want to thank you all. I think this was a fantastic conversation. It's just excellent to have folks in the UK, folks in the US discussing this stuff. Let's make it more focused on an ecosystem, and to that effect, Helen, that was a great way to describe that. But yeah, thank you all so much. I think this was great. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks,
Thank
guys.
Pretty good.
Cheers
Thank
all.
you,
Nick,
everyone.
thanks everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you, guys. This was a great discussion. It's a shame I couldn't be part of it, but there's just one thing I wanted to mention, which I have seen in my experience, is the achieving the alignment between the digital asset and the physical asset, and how the responsibility transfers from one appointed party to the next one. Just something to think about. But yeah, thank you very much. This was great. Can everyone hear me well, see me well? I'm gonna stop my video and share my screen.
Yep.
Someone just, yeah, perfect. So yeah, I'm just gonna hope that nothing will go wrong with my internet connection. So if it does, please let me know in the chat so I can respond or restart the internet. But hopefully that's not gonna happen. All right, so easy. So share, okay. Everyone can see it. Let me just stop my video just a second. I'll do it. Yeah, so. All right. Okay. Welcome to the 46th webinar session, presentation titled BIM Butterfly Effect. Brought to you by Fletcher Priest Architects, BIM Lead, and Des Dobris, respectively me. It is a great honor to participate in an event of such scale and magnitude, so I sincerely thank the organizers for the courage and spirit to pull this off. I truly hope everyone is safe and well considering the situation now, but as we all know, after every storm, there is a rainbow. To those who are not familiar with Fletcher Priest Architects, we are an international practice with offices in London, Köln, and Riga. We mostly work in urban design, architecture, interiors, workplace, and design research. Before we speak, we listen, investing time to understand our clients' ambitions, the characteristics of the site, the needs of the occupants, and the importance of the context is paramount. Storm irresistibly propels him into the future, to which his back is turned, while the pile of debris is growing skyward. This storm is what we call progress. This is a quote from Walter Benjamin, Thesis of Philosophy of History in 1940. I start off with this thought because for the rest of the living world, human activity in the last couple of centuries has generated an immense amount of waste. Although this is not the analogy I will be using, I wanted to use this opportunity to say that by efficiently applying BIM technology and streamlining information management, we can greatly reduce the impact we have on the environment and build a better future. We must embrace digital transformation. Just like with butterfly effect and chaos theory, where sensitive dependence on initial conditions in which a small change in one state of a deterministic, non-linear system can result in large differences in later state, decisions and actions taken in early stages of an asset lifecycle can have a great impact of the outcomes, both positive and negative. As a positive example would be decision to involve the operators of the asset to contribute to the AIR, asset information requirements, which would later ensure automated transfer of the data to the AIM, asset information model. Also, structuring the data in a certain way and defining a level of information need allows automated checking of the information. Although construction as a sector is not complete chaos, it is one of the least productive and most unpredictable of the global industry sectors. That is usually because we are being reactive and poor at planning, thinking about things too late. We have to change that mindset, and everyone has a part to play in this, especially the client. 1 minute in planning or looking into the future. The first butterfly, figuratively speaking, would be the information delivery planning. The universal law, quote by Brian Tracy, which states that 1 minute spent in planning can save up to 10 minutes in execution, could not be closer to the truth in delivering BIM according to the ISO 19650, formerly known as BIM Level 2. Defining information requirements is an undermining principle of information management. Systematic and standardized approach to managing project information can ensure time and cost savings to the overall delivery of a project as well as to the whole life management of an asset. Using ISO 19650 information management principles and processes is a major contributor to achieving that objective. Identification of these requirements by the appointing party with their organization and at the early stages of the project, typically stage 0 and 1, is imperative as it will set the tone, so to speak, for the further gradual development of information. Typically, FPA, being an appointed party, would have to face several challenges, such as interpretation of clients' requirements and responding to them adequately, adjusting in-house standards to the project standard and exchange information requirements, EIR, additional training, and sometimes absence of the requirements in regard to BIM. The latter would be the biggest one as it leaves it to the delivery team's interpretation and additional risk of not meeting the client's expectations. To overcome these obstacles, we have developed necessary documentation templates such as pre-appointment BEP, contracted BEP, capability and capacity forms, task information delivery plan, etc. To accommodate different types of information protocols and project information production methods and procedures, our BIM standard is aligned with ISO 19650 as much as possible and allows a certain degree of flexibility. Our training would focus on any deviations from FPA standard and capture any appointment-specific items. To mitigate any risk relating to unclear requirements, we try to assist the client with presenting detailed design responsibility matrix incorporating information exchanges, showing model taxonomy, responsibility, and level of information need. On the appointing party side, to achieve good results and leverage collaborative production of information, several key documents or sets of requirements shall be considered prior to appointment. The specification of those would be done by the client or his appointed information manager. There must be an understanding of the purpose of the information so that it can be clearly communicated to the information provider. Initial step would be the organizational information requirements, or OIR, that are not necessarily appointment specific, but rather universal and could be used across a portfolio of assets. These high-level requirements help the appointing party to run their business in an informed and effective manner by understanding which activities and purposes the information supports. Once they are complete, they set the scene for the next two: asset information requirements and project information requirements. AIR will specify in detail what is needed to handle physical assets during their life cycle, and PIR will determine what information is needed during delivery phase of the project. Both will then contribute to the exchange information requirements, EIR, that are appointment specific. EIR will include the managerial, commercial, and technical aspects of producing project information. Managerial and commercial aspects should include information standard and the production methods and procedures to be implemented by the delivery team. Technical aspects should include clarification on the detailed pieces of information to answer the PIR. Once these documents requirements are in place, Further documents and vital parts can be derived for a specific project. Contracted BIM execution plan, master information delivery plan, and delivery team's detailed design responsibility matrix. In reality, however, various setbacks can occur due to several factors like capability of appointed parties, insufficient model audit and frequency, absence or poor common data environment, unrealistic requirements, unclear requirements, incomplete requirements, as well as doing BIM for the sake of formality. The right way. Second butterfly is choosing between approaches that would achieve the same result, but simultaneously would allow or disallow other workflows to be improved. That is something to be kept in mind and needs to be seen holistically. For example, segregating the model in a certain way that would minimize the size and optimize the performance, also easing transfer of logical parts to other appointed parties while progressing through the project milestones. What it also can create is confusion if the number of single discipline models exceeds certain amount, let us say 5. For a new member of team, it would take time to familiarize himself with the content and naming. The same applies for the work sets within those files. Again, if used properly, they can greatly improve work sharing and maintenance of the model. But if the number grows over 10, it starts to defeat the purpose. Another example would be combining modeling software like Rhino and Revit. It might seem tempting to quickly create content within Rhino and import by whichever method into Revit for documentation, which would save time initially, but can considerably slow down the handling of the model, limit the flexibility of the graphical information, and affect the documentation outputs. Instead of doing that, only highly complex geometry should be done this way, and the individual should be trained on the full capabilities of the Revit. What if BIM is not a contractual requirement? To efficiently respond to such a situation, in FPA we have classified our own internal levels of BIM that helps us to understand what we are using BIM for and how we organize the resource. They aid us on identifying BIM uses at the outset of the project and help us to control and focus on what is the priority. Ranging from aspirational BIM level or lonely BIM, where we use the 3D models only to produce the documentation, to BIM according to the ISO 9650, where we create data-rich models ready for exchange and aligned with information management principles described earlier. Even when the decisions are made on the way we will produce the models, several important constraints must be taken into account before execution. Capability of the teams is one of the most important aspects, as they are the actual contributors and or providers of the information. Depending on the project specifics and appropriate level of BIM, teams would be formed accordingly. We use different types of testing within the organization: knowledge of the software, BIM industry standards, and BIM awareness, to pinpoint any skill gaps for individuals. To fill those gaps, we have developed training programs that can be cherry-picked to form a combination of lessons that can upskill a team member in a relatively short amount of time. This also includes training modules that can help project leads to better understand additional deliverables for contractual BIM, like COBie, IFC, and use of Uniclass. Apart from setting up the project correctly and upskilling the staff, certain mechanisms should be decided and put in place. Regardless of the level of BIM, there must be well-defined and reoccurring procedures that ensure the top performance on top of choosing the most applicable federation, modeling, and drafting strategies. These quality assurance and control procedures are to be used regularly, and especially prior to exchanging the files with other appointed parties or the client. Any findings are documented and presented to the relevant personnel to decide on the course of action to eliminate the potential problems. Regular meetings, as simple as it sounds, can make a big difference in a long run, as they can assist in detecting challenges, sharing ideas, and stopping errors in their tracks. To reinforce the decisions made in relation to model production, we use maintenance checklists that are to be used weekly, bi-weekly, and monthly to perform necessary actions to keep the model health in check. Also, they register the actions performed and indicate the score that is fed into a master project tracker for a clear overview of how the projects are doing. To streamline the tasks, various Dynamo scripts accompany some of the tasks and allow to automate remedial action. We also use semi-automated audit report process, which instead of following through the steps to maintain the model, just records the actual states and feeds it into the master tracker as well, that introduces another layer of Q&A and is mostly used for projects with higher BIM requirements. These checklists include vital parts that correspond to the modeling and drafting strategies decided at the beginning. Use of in-house content like project templates, family templates, view templates, and whether information requirements are being addressed. To improve the quality of delivery, we have a strong BIM support mechanism consisting of BIM manager and BIM coordinators that deal with any issues that occur during the production. They produce BIM execution plans, organize and lead BIM kickoff meetings, BIM review meetings, coordination meetings, and initial training sessions where necessary. By exploiting these activities, we gain good level of the transparency of the project progress and state that permits us to see what effect the decisions made at the beginning have, and most importantly, adjust where necessary, if possible. Execution. The third butterfly is the execution or the delivery of the project, where we must ensure that the tools and standards are being implemented to the full extent. Non-compliance at this stage, especially for high-level BIM, can create liabilities no one wants to deal with. Therefore, this is where the tools and methodology described earlier must be used and put to a test. Reviewing what has been done and comparing against what has been intended contributes to rationalization where necessary. For example, if it has been decided to use a third-party issue tracking platform for more efficient communication and allocation of problems, but in reality, it has not been used either at all or used only by some, that would mean that either other solution must be carried out or additional training shall be provided to engage all. During this phase, it can be very useful to use workflow diagrams, defining standard processes like preparing files for exchange, updating federated models, performing quality checks, issue resolution, etc. Internally, it is very important, particularly for BIM staff, to lead by example, not only by following the path set before, but actually understanding the reasons behind it and sharing that with others. That encourages other team members to embrace the new way and provides the opportunity for growth. A lot of times it might prove very challenging to implement BIM on a project due to the lack of time and pressure it brings. It is not reasonable to try to force someone to produce certain elements in a short amount of time, especially if they lack knowledge in that area of the software and can achieve the same documentation output on time using different method. This, of course, introduces another set of problems, meaning that it will have to be reviewed later and fixed, either by more experienced team member or BIM support. To mitigate occurrences like these, training should be tailored to suit not only the project, but the individuals as well, and shall be done as early as possible. Also, content to be used must be provided in advance where possible. During kickoff idea that in certain situations BIM support must be consulted has to be clearly conveyed to avoid inefficient production. As mentioned before, feedback is essential. The maintenance process of auditing report would highlight the problematic areas and allow to allocate resource where and when necessary. Presentations that contain the summaries of nonconformities allow to communicate with the team efficiently and come to a solution together, considering best alternatives and way forward, because everyone can contribute and speak their mind. There is no point of deciding to fix something not addressing the root of the problem. It is important that feedback goes both ways. To support execution, using advanced techniques to improve standard workflows is the beauty of working with BIM software. Basic tasks that in the past could have taken up to several hours to perform now can be done in a blink of an eye. We take full advantage of that in FPA and keep growing in that direction. Simple but quite useful automation tasks we can undertake are creating views and sheets, creating work sets and quality control views, extracting parameter values into Excel, injecting parameter values from Excel, migrating parameter values, renaming elements, removing unused imports, filtering in-place families, and the list goes on. Based on the feedback gathered, possible ad hoc trainings can be organized to rapidly fill in the gaps and proceed with the right way. Use of workflow diagrams reveals processes and allows us to streamline them more efficiently, as well as communicate them to other team members. Producing guidance on standard workflows that can accompany the diagrams or stand on their own greatly reduces the time for additional training and gives the flexibility for the student to do it on his chosen time. We take extra care to make them as precise as possible, so amount of questions is minimized. Learn and apply. Inspection of the project information model and the activities, changes, and results is potentially valuable to the practice and people. Acknowledging these victories and learning from mistakes allow us to build expertise, improve standards, enrich our template and content libraries, advance training tactics, all of which is resulting in higher operational effectiveness and better design outcomes. There are, however, some setbacks that obscure the value of this exercise. If BIM is not a requirement, the model probably will not be built as intricate as it would be if BIM would be contracted. On the other hand, there might be some useful BIM elements that could be reused in other projects. It can be hard sometimes to find time for a whole team to share their knowledge of the project or appoint someone to go through the BIM completion tasks. To ease and reduce the time for this exercise, a checklist must be followed that will go through steps like analyzing the BIM objects that can be reused, updated shared parameters, modeling strategies that are worth documenting, specific challenges the project had overcome and that can be noted in guidance documents or BIM standard. All of these findings are registered in BIM completion report with actions assigned where necessary. Examples of how this could be used would be inclusion of an item in the BIM kickoff agenda to pull out similar projects' BIM completion reports that would contribute to better decision making. Another example would be communicating internally at the beginning that such document and its encompassing actions need to be undertaken. That would allow project lead to book time for compiling such document. In conclusion, I wanted to express that asset lifecycle is very much like a metamorphosis of a butterfly. It goes through stages and each stage serves its purpose. It is up to us to provide the environment for successful transformation of information. Okay. Okay, I'm back. Let me just see the questions. Did everyone hear that? No problem?
Yeah, that came through clearly.
Okay, perfect. Then let me just open the questions. Okay. Bring about this. Right, so a question from Siphon. I really hope I'm pronouncing that right. How will BIM bring about the so-called change with most of the people in industry lacking the software skills? I think that is a clear organizational goal to upskill your staff. So with this ever-changing environment, as it was discussed in the panel discussion in different terminology, organizations have to understand that a certain amount of effort should be put in planning the training and identifying which training is specifically needed for people to be up to the speed and be able to compete in the market. Okay. Question from Fred. Do you think Open BIM will be the future of BIM? I'm not sure if I understand what you mean. By Open BIM, you mean like open formats like IFC, or you mean open as everybody can access? Because this might conflict with some non-disclosure agreements. But if you mean IFC, then it definitely is, because it ensures a high level of interoperability. As we all know, IFC can work with up to 150 formats. So it definitely will, because a lot of different disciplines use different software, and these software solutions are still being developed, and there are new ones on the market. So it definitely could be the future, if I understand the question correctly. Yeah, so, okay, question from Remy. How could you expand a little on the measurements of success you discussed? How did these measurements come about, and how effective have you found them? So basically this is, so if we refer to the checklists, that gives us very good understanding where we stand with the model. So for example, you have different actions you have to go through weekly or bi-weekly. So, and they both differ. So if a person who does that basically do the maintenance, and then he registers what he has done, because sometimes it might not be possible to address all the issues. At the end, it creates a score, which is fed back into the master tracker. And for example, if I'm not connected to that project, and I have like 10 or 20 projects to oversee, I see those scorecards. I can, let's say, dedicate my time or someone else's time to jump on that project and address those issues. So the problems with that was upskilling the personnel how exactly to do it. And some of them are quite tricky to address, and we all know that the warnings within the files that slow down the files are not always as easy to fix. So sometimes, it will be just partial maintenance. So for example, the score you give after you go through one checkpoint of maintenance would be half score. So that, for example, if I see that the scorecard is giving a poor result, I would open that checklist and go through that checklist and see what's the problem, why is it low, and it's all about documenting these findings, and not trying to create good results when they're not there, but actually just showing the state of the models, so that they could give a objective basis for decisions to be made. Question from Ray. Do you find it difficult to stick to the methodology you outlined at the beginning of the project due to unforeseen changes, ADC, etc.? Well, it's all about the clarity of the requirements. If everything's clear and presented in the right form, and we can understand it, there shouldn't be any problems with that, if that makes sense. So it's all about the clarity, and it's up to the client to actually go through that and seek consultation from consultants that could assist him with creating these requirements, so that whatever you produce, you can say, deliver in confidence. And but that is a big problem. It's like the ambiguity of requirements. So yeah, that's actually it. Thank you for your time, for attention. I hope this was useful, and yeah, keep pursuing the BIM journey. Thank you.
Thank you so much to all of our speakers for taking part in today's webinar, and thank you to those in the audience for joining us today. You'll receive a link via email to watch the session on demand. For those who had questions unanswered, we'll be sending these to the speakers and will publish their responses on our website. Our next webinar will be taking place on July 8th at 4 p.m. UK time and 11 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time. This will include 2 panel discussions entitled Mitigating Risk in Construction and Let's Talk Legal Aspects of BIM. We hope you enjoyed today's webinar, and we look forward to seeing you at the next one. Thank you all and see you soon.